Rina, how can you actually get rid of the fantasies? Is it possible? I mean, how can you get over this shame, which is very much ingrained in us?
Yeah, well, okay. So we can't get rid of our fantasies. And the more we try to suppress them or ignore them, the worse it is for us. Because, you tell someone, like, don't think of a pink leopard. And of course, your brain is going to think of the pink
Exactly.
leopard. So the more we try to suppress them, the more likely they are to become psychological preoccupations, which is bad for us. So instead of saying, okay, I want to ignore or suppress this fantasy, what I tell people is to make friends with your fantasy and understand that just because you're thinking about something that looks like XYZ doesn't necessarily mean that you want to do it that way. And I can kind of give an example for what that might look like here. We want to get curious about the fantasy itself. Okay, what is it about this fantasy that turns you on, right? So, for example, I was working with a couple recently, and the wife was like, I want to have a threesome. I
Okay.
want to have a threesome.
Okay.
And the husband was like, I don't know, like that just seems like it might cause problems. So they came to me saying, how do we figure this out? And so once we got curious, why do you want to have a threesome with the wife? She said, well, I want my pleasure to be the focus, right?
The
I want my
woman's thing.
pleasure. Yeah, she's like, I want my pleasure to be the focus, which is typical for women who fantasize about group sex. And so she listed off a few other reasons. And it turned out that it wasn't that she necessarily wanted more than her husband in the room. It's just that she wanted the attention focus on her.
Exactly.
Right. So if you can understand what is it about the fantasy that turns me on, you can then devise a bunch of different ways to start meeting that need without engaging in the fantasy itself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, you mentioned threesome. In Kerala, I live in the southern part of India, called a state called Kerala. Have you been to Kerala by any chance?
I've never been to India yet. Yet. I've not been to
Okay,
India
you,
yet.
you should come over anyway.
I would love to.
So, I talk to a lot of youngsters. A lot of youngsters, couples keep calling me. They share their personal interests and desires relating to sexuality. Many of them. So, threesome is one major adventurous fantasy which many youngsters have, along with cuckolding. Which is
Yeah.
also another interesting area of. But many a time when I discuss, I talk to the couples it separately. It is most of the time it is the male partner who actually pressurizes the woman to get into such adventurous activities. Most of them, it's with a great deal of reluctance. So I find it, most of the time the woman is not actually going along with the fantasy which a man wants to enjoy or experience. So as a intimacy coach, I mean, I would like to know from you what would be your advice to such men who is very much eager to experimenting such adventurous kings, but at the same time, the woman is very apprehensive and reluctant. So how can you? What is the way forward for this?
Well, look, sometimes you can't split the baby, right? If one person says, I definitely want to be able to have sex with more than one person and more than just you, I do not want monogamy. And the other person says, I'm sorry, but I want monogamy. There's really no compromise there. But are there ways that we can start to dabble with the reasons behind why the male partner might want the threesome? Is it that they want the experience of being able to get turned on by multiple people? Well, maybe watch some porn together, right? Maybe do some role play in terms of, you each pretending to be someone else, or you assuming, more than one role at the same time. So before doing something and bringing a live 3D human being into the bedroom, I always recommend, because, that can be, if done correctly, it can be wonderful, but there's so many ways it can go wrong, which
Oh,
is, an area that I help my clients with. So figure out, how can we try to meet this need with perhaps the technology and the tools that we have available to us. There are also some really great kind of AI tools that exist too, and where that are meant for people with penises, like strokers that sync up to videos that you're watching.
Yeah.
So that could help fill some of that need too. But if we start peeling back the layers, and really the reason this guy wants to have a threesome is because he literally cannot feel like he is expressing his full range of sexual desire and who he is and his identity in the confines of monogamy, that's a whole different question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. How much of an issue this sexual compatibility between couples that is many a time becomes a problem as the relationship progresses, right?
A lot, a lot. Or people stick around despite the sexual compatibility. I mean, it's interesting because sex is really the thing that separates romantic partners or, life partners from friends, from family, from colleagues. And unless you're on the asexual spectrum, sex is in and of itself the thing that defines what type of relationship you have, right? And yet it's often the one that we gauge compatibility with last because we have messages telling us, especially women, well, you got to wait, right? And so we get into this interesting paradox where we're waiting and then we're getting to know this person so much, maybe we're developing feelings for them. And then we get into the bedroom and we realize, oh my gosh, we're not actually sexually compatible. But then we feel like, well, I can't just break up with them because of that.
Yeah.
I've put so much effort into it. Right. So it's kind of like this sunken cost fallacy that we have. There's an entire chapter in my book called Do It Soon, where I talk about the value of gauging that compatibility early on. And say, fair, you don't want to do everything right away. I'm not saying you have to go home and sleep with people the first night that you meet. But are there ways to gauge compatibility ahead of time without going all the way, without doing everything? Absolutely. Take the BDSM test, have your partner take it, have conversations. What are your views on monogamy, right? Yeah. There's so many tools at our disposal now to get curious about this, to gauge that compatibility before we ever even take our clothes off.
Also, Rena, talking about various fantasies like threesome and cuckolding, realistically, how much, what is the percentage or the possibility of these fantasies turning out to be really good for the couples who are engaging in it?
Well, if you're looking for a statistic here, I mean, I think that's kind of hard to measure, right? Because ultimately, and I'll kind of paraphrase Dan Savage here, is that when things go wrong in a non-monogamous relationship, we tend to blame the non-monogamy. When things go wrong in monogamous relationships, we don't tend to blame the monogamy, right?
True.
So we tend to only hear about the horror stories when sometimes what happens is that couples are already on the rocks and they're trying to save their relationship by having a threesome. And it ends up that that's the thing that doesn't save it, right?
Correct.
So we wouldn't say like, does having kids break up relationships, right? Sometimes it's correlation. It's not causation.
Correct.
But I've seen a lot of instances where opening up has been the thing that has allowed couples to stay together. But I talk about, I like to think of non-monogamy kind of like scuba diving, right? Like if you do things right,
okay.
If you do things right and you take your time, you get certified, right? You learn all the steps so that you can do this in a controlled way and do it safely. It can open up new worlds of possibility. You get to see so much more. But if you try to rush into it without knowing what you're doing, it can be disastrous.
Absolutely.
So yes, the data tells us that couples who enact their fantasies show the highest rates of relationship satisfaction. The problem is people aren't necessarily doing them the right way and having the conversations productively, which is why, you don't have to do it alone. There are people like me out in the world that help people. There are books out there you can read. There are people like you. So, you wouldn't try to learn how to scuba dive on your own. You would go to a professional to help you learn how to do this.
Absolutely. So basically, you need to have a great deal of conversation and possibly a practice before venturing into any kind of sexual experimentation. Is that what you say?
Communicate, communicate,
I mean,
Communicate.
yeah.
Absolutely.